Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the space. My name is Likuyani Eli, if you wish to. And I do take this opportunity to welcome you to this interesting space that intends to address our issues to deal with forest conservation with the hashtag Shamba System. You might be aware of the ongoing debates around the forest conservation after Kenya's deputy president announced that government had plans to allow communities to be able to go into the forest and cultivate in order to provide food for themselves and ensure we are food secure. And therefore, this conversation is tailored to engage each and every one of us to be able to understand if this is only but a political gimmick government is already doing, courtesy of the deputy president, or is this the only sure way to ensure that Kenya is food secure? You equally understand today from State House, the president was able to flag food aids towards northern Kenya in aid of people who have been affected by the ongoing hunger. And, there's been drought in the country, and therefore people are suffering and dying due to that. And therefore, we just want to engage with you guys and everyone that is joining in order to understand if this is the best solution out of this. History will equally remind you that it's a year since, it's been 11 years since the demise of very gallant daughter of Kenya, Professor Wangari Maathai, the late, who won awards for being a champion in conservation of our environment with the Green Belt movement. But today, the same spirit she was fighting for to conserve our forests seemed to be on the line and possibly could be another invasion. We can also go back to history and learn about the Mao forest and how it was intruded and how government had to do everything in its power to be able to relocate or ask intruders of the forest to actually leave. So, is this a dangerous setup that the deputy president is setting out, or is this the solution that we need? Therefore, engage us with the hashtag Shamba System and feel free to request for the mic in order to contribute to this conversation. I greet each and everyone that is coming in, and I see Abdul Rahma is here with us. Geoffrey, a very good friend of mine, Ernest Kiki, karibuni sana. So I will like to open the floor and feel free to contribute to this conversation. Anyone willing, you may request the mic on the left panel of your screen. As I'm trying to add speakers to the speaker request, I see Geoffrey has accepted to join the speaker request. Ernest, I've accepted your request, but you seem to have lost connection. I will try to add you once again on the speakers panel. But let's start with you, Geoffrey. What do you make of Deputy President remarks in a funeral attendance and announcing government was going to allow the possible coming back of the Shamba system? Mr. Geoffrey.
Hello, Eli. Hello, everyone else.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Now, for me, I don't think if the Shamba system is a bad thing, as long as it is managed properly. The issue that I have is this thing that we call a roadside pronouncement. Because now the problem that you're going to have, if government policy is going to be pronounced even before being discussed at cabinet level, it could arise to chaos, because now you can imagine if there are some people who had the DP speaking about this thing, and people who live around forest areas, some people could even decide, because they had it from the DP, they could decide and go ahead and start farming in the forest area before it becomes an official government policy. But the Shamba system itself, if it is something that is properly managed, it can work. For example, if you give people forest land as an incentive and you include the professionals, you say, this part of the forest, because it has this kind of plantation, you can use it for farming for this season, okay? But then you tell the same people, around the area that you're doing farming in the forest land, it is your responsibility to make sure that you are the security of that part, so that the incentive that the farmer gets is that he's going to benefit by getting produce from that area, but then he becomes a sole responsibility for ensuring that stuff like logging does not happen around that area. So for me, I think it is something that should be discussed by stakeholders up to the cabinet level. And then if they find it, if they find systems of managing it properly, then it becomes government policy, instead of making pronouncements before even discussions. It can lead to chaos. Eli, I think that is very important.
Geoffrey, thank you for that presentation. I just want to engage you further on the same. Now that you've mentioned it could be a best situation to have the Shamba system coming back. I mentioned about the issue to deal with Mau Forest, for example. You remember the times that the former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga was put on the spot for trying to enforce the idea of saving our water catchment areas. And going by history, it will be a little bit, I'll be hesitant to actually support the idea, since we have seen a situation whereby when people encroach the forest, they actually go and do logging. And, with this illegal logging, a significant amount of forest was lost to fires. So what could be the magic that will happen this time round to prevent this? Maybe you can engage me further on that.
I think, Eli, when you look back at the history of Mau, the problem came in whereby the large tracts of land were given to politicians or to high-ranking government officials. And then it is those people who subdivided the land to the normal Wananchi and allowed them to get into the forest. So it's all boils down to what? It all boils down to governance. That is why I was saying, if it is something that the DP has in mind and he thinks that it can help the farmers, it can help the country by increasing the quantity of produce that we get, it is something that is supposed to be discussed intensively by every stakeholder. Because what happened during the Mau forest is the governments that of the day at that particular moment used the wrong way. Even the former president, President Moi, had a very huge tract of land in Mau forest. So if they are going to make it something that would work and benefit both farmers and the country at large, then it needs, first of all, public participation, and then professionals also to be included, to make sure that we do not have people who act as what will I say, as brokers, people who will get huge tracts of land and then make huge benefits from it by selling to other people. In that, if they decide that it's going to the farmers direct, they find a way of making sure that it benefits the farmers directly without involving especially the political class. That is the most important thing. So the government, and that one goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that it is very dangerous to be making roadside pronouncements, because these kind of pronouncements go us back to the Moi government, where the former president would stand on the road and just announce something from somewhere, from nowhere, and then things happen. So for it to be properly done, for the Shamba system to properly work, let the stakeholders be involved, let the professionals be involved, let it be discussed to the level of the cabinet, and then we see if it is something that can be managed properly. Because for me, I think if it is managed properly, it will benefit the farmers and benefit the country at large.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey, for that. I'm trying to invite guys to speak. I don't know if you guys are seeing the microphone on your end, or if you're having a problem joining, let me know. I see a good friend of mine who is very, very environment conservative, if that's the word. Fifi Pats, I want to invite you to speak to us on your issue, the idea to deal with Deputy President Rigathi requesting, or rather instructing, or giving hope to communities that possibly will be going to the forest and cultivating the forest alongside the trees and being able to produce food for our nation. Geoffrey, let me get back to you as I wait for that to come from Fifi Pats.
Yes.
Someone has argued Kenya is less than 7% of thereabout struggling with forest cover. We have the rest of 93 plus, and the UN has suggested that we need about 10% of forest cover. Why can't we go to the other existing lands and tracts of land to produce our food? What is stopping us from doing that?
Eli, I think we, as a country, we must develop means of ensuring that there is sustainability, both to issues of working out, especially things that have led to global warming. For example, plantation of trees. This is not something that should not even be lagging in government implementation. Every government should have a program in place whereby tree plantation is done in huge numbers. That is something that should have been there, something that should be there currently and even in the future. But then this is what is happening, Eli. If you look at the forest land, for example, if you go to Mount Kenya area, where the forest land begins, that area is very fertile. Okay? And you will find that even currently with the ban on logging, if you go to those areas, there are still people who are farming in these areas or logging. So these things can work properly if we have a government that have proper systems in place. You're talking about other tracts of land. We have the Gulalu, it's called Gulalu Kolani.
The Gulalu area, and maybe I'll mention something about it later on, but go ahead.
The Gulalu area. What happened to Gulalu was all about management, because I read the other day that we still allocate funds to that project until now. The last budget, that project was allocated 304 million, if I had it right from the sources that I got. So everything, the reason why I have confidence, a little bit of confidence in this government, despite the fact that I did not vote for them. If you look at the way this government that is in place right now, the way they organize themselves during the elections, during the campaigns, they have some level of organization. That is why I'm saying, let them then reflect that level of organization that they had during the campaigns and during the elections into the management of running, especially the executive part of government, so that when it comes to such issues of agriculture and the use of the Shamba system, it is something that is organized, that is discussed at very high levels, so that we have proper management. So for me, the level of confidence that I have in this government tells me that if they can reflect the organization that they had during campaigns and during elections and afterwards, and implement it in running of affairs, of government affairs, then that system will work. And if they involve other professionals.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. I mean, you've been a very, very valuable speaker. And for those that are joining us right now, we are talking about the issue of Shamba system vis-a-vis conservation. We understand, for those who know, that the Deputy President, I believe that was on Saturday, if I'm not wrong, was in a public event, which was a funeral, and announced that they had given instructions that we are going to return back to the forest in order to cultivate food alongside our forests, and therefore securing our nation from hunger. Today, the president from State House flagged off trucks of donations and food aid to the northern part of Kenya, where we are told there are a lot of families and Kenyans starving to the point of death. And he has promised that with coming plans, they will want to see no Kenya dies because of hunger. But we're trying to understand, how is this going to play out if we allow our forest area to be under threat, quote unquote. I want to welcome a speaker here. His name is Ernest. Let's see what he thinks about this conversation. Ernest, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Geoffrey. I see you've handled a little bit of the science behind this whole proclamation, and I also want to agree with you to some extent, because I have read about it, and especially in places where it's worked already. But my only issue is that we know from past that government has never been very, very efficient when it comes to pulling or the actualization or the practical where the rubber meets the road. When it comes to implementation, the government usually, because of many issues, sometimes they just don't have the will for it to be done the way it's supposed to be done. Sometimes it is about capacity for amount of resources that will be required. And then also, even for the farmers themselves, do they have the proper capacity? Do they have the knowledge to do it properly? Who's going to monitor? Because Kenyans also sometimes can be greedy, and people will want to cut shortcuts to get to the money instead of doing things the right way, because they don't want to do they don't want to go through the pain. So I'm just very worried, that it starts off maybe well, and then we end up losing the forest. I'm just very, very, and then also, I mean, there's been research done before about what agriculture, the challenges that agriculture as a sector faces. And one of the biggest is funding. There's not much accessibility to funds to those who are doing agriculture. The other bit is people need to increase scale. And for them to increase scale, all they need is the money. The money is available, but no one wants to lend to farmers. Whatever money that is available comes expensive, and then it comes tied with a lot of requirements, and one of them is collateral. Yeah, so I don't know. I just think this was a proclamation, because we know from before, government, when these people come in, there is a pressure for them to reward those that help them get to these positions. There's also the other side where they've made promises to get to these positions. They made promises to the electorate, and they're looking for ways to look like they're thinking about the electorate, while they really know for sure 100% that they probably will not meet all the expectations, and they are never honest enough to accept. So I'm a little bit concerned about it, and I think it's really not the best. But I think probably by now the government should think and go back to what the research has given us and think about how do we make farmers increase their scale? How do they add scale? How do they add scale? How do they move away from rain-reliant farming? Yeah. How do we create markets? Because there are usually oscillations on the demand side. If there's no demand, the food rots. How do we make sure there's value addition? Things like cold storage. You see, cold storage is also an area whereby, especially for fish farming, we have a lot of fish, but if the farmer doesn't sell all the fish on that same day, it goes bad. So those are my points, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernest. You mentioned very important points there, including the fact that we produce and end up leaving this to spoil because we have no storages. And we'll be looking probably into that as we proceed with the conversation. You can chat us in the chat section with the hashtag Shamba System. Invite as many people as possible who are very intentional about food security and conservation. I want to quickly recognize my good friend Brief Scoop, who will be joining me as a co-host. But before he comes in, let me allow Farahine to speak to us. Farahine, and then followed by Godwin and Mao Day. Thank you. Farah, if you're there, you can pick up the mic. And I would love for Prof to actually come in. If you're listening to me, Prof Serone, you've shared a link, but I would like for you to explain the detail in that link. That way you can bring all of us up to speed. Farahine, kindly speak to us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening to you, sir. How are you? And welcome.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for the welcome. Can you please give me just 2 minutes? I come back. 2 minutes.
Sure, sir. You can be able to join us once you're ready. Just give a show of hand up, and then I'll be able to invite you. Let's go to Godwin, followed by Mao, Tiondo, and then Brief Scoop.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the space, and hi to everyone who's here listening and the speakers. First, I want to start from where the previous speakers left and say this is one thing I'm really disagreeing with, because I don't think the issue with Kenyan food security is about places where farmers need like enough land or something. The issue that has been ailing food security in Kenya has been misappropriation of fund and then expensive farm inputs. So the government had started on a right footing when they started by giving subsidized fertilizers, but now moving forward to issue of reintroducing the issue of Shamba system, when not only Kenya but the entire globe is battling the issue of climate change. I don't think that's the best way to go, because looking at those areas like the forest areas are the places that are really holding up the country, because you come to metropolitan areas, places like Nairobi, where we are planting more buildings than we're planting trees, then we find our environment is really in danger. And that's why you've been seeing some sort of inconsistency with the amount of rain that has been coming. There's been a confusion in the entire weather system, or rather, I don't know how to put it, because the way we understood weather when we were growing up, it was easily predictable that during from this month to this month we'll be having heavy rains, from this month to this month we'll be having short rains, and then these are months that are going to be dry. But as we speak right now, the weather is so confused. Today it will rain, tomorrow it's very cold, the other day it's very hot. You understand? And all these things emanate from somewhere. It's all from somewhere, you understand? So I think the Shamba system statements by the DP, I'll term them as reckless. And someone said our DP to some extent is still, his tone is more of a campaigning tone than someone who's now supposed to be implementing whatever they promised. And this populist politics of trying to please people and trying to, I don't know, because this is not a time of continue promising to promise people. You know, this is a point where you go and tell people, we promise you this now. This is what we are going to deliver. This is how we've started, and these are the measures we're putting in place. You know, so I think the issue of Shamba system is something I really disagree with, and it's really pointing a lot to how the relationship of the DP and the president is going to be during their tenure, because when you make such proclamation and then it causes outrage, now the president has to come and reverse and say, you know what, we are not given orders yet. When the DP was giving the remarks, was saying we have given orders. So it makes one wonder, like, who are we that we're giving orders, yet on the other hand someone else is denying the orders that you said. So I think we should look beyond what is ailing, because as we said in the previous spaces, we said if they are going to deal with the issue of food security, then they have to deal with the issue from the root cause, not the top part of it, where maybe by subsidizing UNGA as it has been. But when they had started with the issue of subsidized fertilizer, that's a right step to go, but not the issue of now bringing back people to encroach into the forest. Thank you very much, Eli.
Thank you, Godwin, for that submission. And you pointed out that probably the DP seem to still think he is campaigning to become government. He has not realized he is actually in government, and probably some of those comments are coming from that aspect. Before I bring in the next speaker, let me quickly read through some chats that you guys are sending in the chat bot. We have a very good Professor Matalong says, is the question of food insecurity attributable to lack of arable land or under non-utilization of available land? That is question. Maize is a crop that requires a lot of light and warmth. How does it do within the forest system given the shadow of the canopies? Would we use the desert? Great question there. In his opinion, the only viable crop in the forest farming system is legalized hemp. Wajakoya would be very happy to hear that. Miss Fifi Ture was supposed to be one of our speakers. Unfortunately, cannot join, but sends us a message in the chat. Says maybe we can also ask ourselves why it was banned twice on two different regimes. Are those reasons resolved first? Secondly, does he mean that we are facing hunger because we are not farming on forests? Thirdly, what happens to the wildlife in the forest? More questions than answers are being raised in this conversation. Tiondo says, please don't mistake urban understanding of forest sustainability and local, two different analogies. Okay, looking forward to your contribution, sir, on that conversation. You can join us with the hashtag Shamba System. Equally request for a mic to speak to us. I want to invite Maude to speak, followed by Devina. And I will ask Briefscoop to take a hot chill pill there, followed by Professor Seronei. I saw Tiondo, sorry. Let me just do that again. Maude, Tiondo, Devina, and Professor Seronei. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'll speak for a bit long. Please bear with me. The first thing I want to say is...
Can you make it 3 minutes or to 5 maximum, please?
Okay, let me summarize as much as I can. The first thing I want to say is that I've posted an infographic there differentiating between tree cover and forest cover. And that is where the exact crux of the matter is. Tree cover is anything that is the plantations that you see that have very few species in them, cypress, pine, eucalyptus, and all that, the ones that are commercially grown. If you realize in those plantations, you'll realize the biodiversity is very low. The number of species are very low, and most of them are exotic, and most of them do not support local biodiversity. They do not support plants, insects, birds, worms, and all that. They also have very little undergrowth, which means when it rains, that water causes erosion and it doesn't percolate. The other thing you'll realize about these tree plantations is that they are regularly felled for sale, which means they don't mature into mature ecosystems. Every 7 years, every 10 years, the whole place is cleared and then it is planted again. Now, when you say you want to increase tree cover, it's very different from when you say you want to increase forest cover. Tree cover covers those plantations, it includes them. Forest cover is something very different because a forest is an ecosystem. It has biodiversity. It has very many species, and these species interact with each other to create one coherent ecosystem. There are things living on the tree, inside the tree, around the tree, and under the tree. And this tree is not felled every 7 or 10 years. It stays there for decades, for centuries, it stays there. So when you're saying you want to increase forest cover, it's very, very different from when you say you want to increase tree cover. Now that's where the contention between David Ndei and Professor Madai is coming. David Ndei is saying Professor Madai was wrong because she was saying that we should not touch the indigenous forests. And he's saying that we need to increase tree cover. If you notice, everything Ndei is saying, is talking about, is about tree cover, which is not what we're interested in. We're interested in forest cover. The second thing I wanted to say was that when you want to farm and use the Shamba system, believe it or not, you can use the Shamba system to increase both forest cover and tree cover. Tree cover is definite. Once you clear those trees for commercial purposes and you want to plant other trees, when the trees are young, they need to be nurtured until they establish. And this takes around 2 to 3 to 4 years. When it's still a young tree, when it's still a sapling, and you plant food around it, it's okay, because as you tend the food, you tend the tree. And then when the tree seals its canopy, it starts creating the shade that Prof was talking about, you move away because your food crop won't survive there. Now, the same thing can be done for forest cover. Where you have deforested, you don't go to farm inside the already established forest. You go to the places where loggers have cleared space and the forest there has been depleted. You go there, you tell people we are planting indigenous trees only. Then they do their shambas there, they nurture the trees. Once the indigenous trees establish, those guys move to the next lot and they leave the trees to establish. Now, if that clearly shows that you can use the Shamba system to establish both the tree cover and the forest cover. The final thing I wanted to say is that politics is macroeconomics equals ecology. Politics equals macroeconomics equals ecology. The problem that is happening here is that you find the DP is a politician. David Ndei is an economist, and there's no ecologist there talking. Now we need ecologists there to tell them the ecosystem is the boss. Whatever the politician says and whatever the economist says, it must agree with what the ecosystem says, because the ecosystem is the boss. If you cut trees or you interfere with indigenous forests, you interfere with the entire hydrological cycle, you interfere with the entire nutrient cycle, and nothing will survive. But when you respect the ecology and you leave the indigenous forest alone, the earth will take care of you. Once you touch that, you mess everything. Then finally, Kabisa. David Ndei is correct in saying Professor Madai was wrong in some areas, not in all areas. She was very correct in saying don't touch the indigenous forest. But we understand where she was coming from when she said cut one tree and plant two, because Moi was cutting all the trees. But if you follow that advice, 100% assured, you'll end up with deforestation. Because when you cut a mature tree, establishing two saplings to the extent that it reaches this mature tree takes centuries. So a tree is like a kid. A kid has to be sheltered by an adult. When you cut the adult tree and you come and plant kids there with no adult tree to take care of them, those trees, 90% of the time, they will die. So you're not supposed to cut one and plant two. In fact, you're supposed to plant 4 and then cut 1. So you leave 3 there. First, establish 4 trees. Then out of those trees, cut 1. Thanks.
Wow, Maude, I don't know how I was going to stop you, but I couldn't stop you because of what you're saying is very, very important. And we just trying to get to understand why the DP thought it was wise to rethink and reestablish Shamba system. Ideally, us is to get here, discuss, and chat way forward to help one and all of us to make the right decision when it comes to conservation. Karibuni sana for who are joining us. you can request the mic in the speaker section, and equally chat us in the chat with the hashtag Shamba System. My name is Eli or Eli Likuyani, depending on your bank account balance. I don't mind both names being used either way. For now, I will ask Tiondo to speak to us, followed by, the other speaker just jumped out, so no problem. Then we'll have Professor Matelong to speak to us.
Eli, so before we move on, I was drinking literally every word that Mao there was feeding us, because it was such good knowledge. Do you feel that you fully understood that? Because quite frankly, honestly, I feel like I would love to have sort of a quick summary or recap of some of those things. But if I'm the only one who didn't understand, then that's fine. We can go on, and I can reach out to Mao there directly.
I think I'm just trying to be able to move forward in a good way, and I know there's a great professor coming after this session who is a good teacher. Probably he will break it down for us. So I hope he was taking his notes. Can I just allow Tiondo to go ahead before we have Professor, followed by Emma? Thank you.
Hey, thank you, host. I'll be quick. I'm actually on a little break, so I don't have much time. And I'm not going to go into detail. I'm not going to go into the scientific part of stabilization of soil, microclimate. I'm not going to go into prevention of runoffs. I'm gonna just go control of soil salinity. I will just go to the basic part. The problem that we have the moment in our country, we don't. It's not that we have food shortage. We lack the market for our products. That is the main thing. If we had a huge market for our products, our farm inputs, I guarantee you, all those farmers, whatever they're producing, they would be producing at a large scale. Now, if you look at it, for instance, at the moment, the cost of productivity is way too high than when you sell your product. So it doesn't even make sense. That's why you see most of the farmers, and I'm saying this because I grew up myself in a place, I was raised by farmers. It's reached a point where you don't see the point of, for instance, right now we having food shortage in terms of maize. People just give up. They go for other things. So I don't understand the analogy that our DP is using, thinking if we allow people now to go to the forest and they start farming now and produce more products, or whatever they produce, more agricultural products, yet we don't have the market, where is it going to go? We have our maize that is rotting in the cereal boards. We have our milk that is always thrown at a throwaway price. So that if we can address that first, the market, then maybe we'll be well off to say, okay, now we've understood the problem is not really food shortage, but it's actually the market. Now, the other thing, I'm gonna just try to keep it to the simplest way, because I grew up around forest system itself. It's not as easy as the way people think, okay? You have to understand, this is not a place that you just go straight to the forest and you start, just plowing straight away. This has to be like manual plowing. Now, if you talk to the locals will be okay with the little pieces of land. But the problem, what has been happening in the past, some of these politicians, they come in, they take huge tracts of land and they start plowing in it. And now it just defeats the purpose. So it's a good thing to start with the locals, but then the problem, we always have these big players who come in and take advantage of it. And now the forest ends up being depleted and then it's being shut down. I've seen that. I saw that in Kaptagat. I've seen that in the 90T, whatever, when the settlement was done. It's just so much politics going into it. So to me, in my own opinion, having grown around it, it's not worth it. But if we can establish the market, yes. For farm produce, we have enough land to produce enough food without touching the forest. Those are my 2 cents, and I drop my mic.
Wow, mic drop. Tiondo says that is his 2 cents. We have enough land to produce enough food. I won't add a word on that. Let's have you, Professor Sarunei, followed by Divina. Followed by Ima and Divina. It's your floor, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Eli, and the rest of the team. I think this has been a great eye opener. If you can hear me well, just say yes, because I'm using a Bluetooth mic.
Yeah, probably adjust it a little bit closer, then you're more
Okay.
audible.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, having had a day of lots of telephony, that must be having an impact on it. So, I mean, I think we need to separate two things. The first thing that we need to separate, and I really love the presentation by Mao Day. You know, there was somebody who was asking whether it could be summarized. I think in essence, he was educating us that we need to understand the difference between a tree cover and a forest. And I love it that for a forest, you have a canopy. That means the trees are basically forming a very nice umbrella, whereas in a tree cover, it is just an individual tree, you know, standing alone. In the case of a forest, when there is a canopy, it's not about the tallest tree or the shortest tree, because the cover provides basically that. It provides the cover. Now, the problem is that when you have a canopy, which is what you probably would have in a forest, you then do not have any undergrowth that requires light. So a lot of the undergrowth in the forest would be anything that doesn't require substantial amount of light. And that is why in a forest you wouldn't get, like, you know, the typical grass that you get in an area with parchments of trees growing, you know, one place here and the other at another point. And I think we really need to temper that with a bit of the history. You know, those of us who've lived around for some time might remember that when Rigiji was the DO somewhere, I can't remember where, there was a man called President Moi. And when President Moi was the CEO of the country called Kenya, he actually allowed people, probably because of politics, to do some forest farming. And I was a student at Egerton University in the 1990s when in places like Likia, I think, you know, Likia, where you have the Okiek or the Dorobo, as they call them, you know, the Okiek in the side of Molo, on the other side of Molo, their land was basically forest depleted, and so you had you know, parchments of shrubs of trees here and there, because the place was mercilessly farmed and exploited for potato growing, maize, even livestock grazing, which livestock wouldn't be a problem, except that the reason people would graze livestock there, especially cattle, is because the forest cover would be depleted, and therefore you start getting grass growing. You know, Kikuyu grass would be growing, and you get all these kind of grasses which are able to sustain, you know, cattle farming. And in an area which is very notorious, I've just posted there, closer to my home in Tindret, actually to the east of my home. If I stood home and looked towards Timboroa to the east, I would basically be seeing the Eldoret Nairobi Road at a place called Napkoi. And there are areas where you see sort of, you know, sengenges that would tell you this was the end of the forest and the beginning of some settlement. But, you know, for kilometers, you wouldn't see a tree anymore because there was that abuse. And this is where I come to my second point. The problem with allowing the shamba system in Kenya is because of our over-reliance on maize, you know. And because we rely on maize a lot, Maize is a notorious crop. It doesn't matter where it is grown, whether it's grown in Germany or the US or Belgium or in Kenya. You need two very basic ingredients. You need lots of warmth, and that's why when it is very cold, they don't grow. And then you need lots of light. That means maize cannot grow in an area with a forest cover where there is a thick canopy. So you need some exposure to light. And so what people did is they cleared a part of the forest, the Tindret forest. It doesn't matter where you are. If you are in Kisumu and you're looking towards the east towards Timboroa, you will see some naked top of the Tindret forest, which hasn't recovered to date. Whether you're driving from Nairobi towards Eldoret, at some point after Hiloti, you will see a very exposed area, which is, it used to be forested. It's no longer forested because there is simply no discipline. The Kenyan forest farmer is not going to say, I'm going to live in harmony with the trees and the forest, and therefore I get my food here while the forest is surviving on the other. They are going to do anything they will to ensure that they cut off the branches and expose the ground to light. And in that sense, they will be destroying that family of a forest and isolating the trees into individuals. And then you get people coming in and they are going to grow whatever it is they will grow. And because they are clearing, they will also get to do certain very crazy things like burning charcoal. I have seen that. I've seen people burn charcoal in the forest. And so what do we do? What does Gachagua do about indiscipline among Kenyans? What does he do about the fact that our understanding of forest farming is not what the academics are doing in the world, which is forest farming is basically where people get mushrooms, people get decorative plants like ferns, and people get herbs like ginseng and all these others. Because for us, forest farming is about food. It's not anything else. And so it brings me to the three questions that I asked earlier. Is food insecurity in Kenya a consequence of insufficient land? And probably, we asked before, and I think there was Karanja who was telling me, don't go there. When I raised this question before, I think brief scope, you still remember, I said, part of the problem we need to address in Kenya is the way we have fragmented land. And I know you raised a question at that time, and I wasn't able to answer. Because I come from an area where people are currently selling land at 0.05, half of a point, I mean, literally unsustainable. You're going into the sort of urban planning level of pieces of land being sold in agricultural land. And this is despite the fact that we have a law that says the minimum land that can be titled is supposed to be 1 hectare, 2.5 acres. I think that was something that Kimunya moved when he was minister for lands. And so just to contextualize this really, I support Maude's education and pedagogy there. It really helped us to understand it's not about the trees, it's about the forest, it's about the family of trees. And how do we understand the fact that we need a canopy? Because that's what is the driver of really saying we have a forest cover vis-a-vis our ambition to produce food in an area where we understand that food production means we need crops that are exposed to a lot of light and a lot of heat. And then the indiscipline. To me, if there is anything that really irritates me, it is the fact that a Kenyan typically will not be disciplined enough to say, I have been given access to this piece of forest, and I'm going to take care of these trees as the trees feed me, and I'm going to take care of this food that I'm growing here as this food is going to feed me. And I don't know which the best way would be adopted. I mean, is it going to be that people will get portions and parcels of forest land where you're basically allocated, and you are told, here is your potentially 2 acres of forest land you're going to farm. I don't think that's going to work. It's likely that it's also going to be about the muscle. Whoever goes in there and has the say from the chief, or has the wherewithal, can bribe his way around, you get to farm a bigger piece of land than anybody else. And that is why my rider there, which looks funny but is serious, is I think the only forest farming that I would encourage at this point in Kenya is to plant hemp. And I'm not talking about bangi, I'm talking about hemp. Thanks a lot, Eli.
Thank you so much, Prof. You conclude with an important aspect of what can be put into the forest and have a peaceful coexistence with the rest of us. I see Maude is very happy about that idea. All of us will be knowing why. But let's just keep it as food for thought. And again, Geoffrey mentioned about it being a great idea to have food security, and it's something that is practical. However, most of us are raising concern on the impact that probably the DP might not have calculated, which include how are we going to ensure the indisciplined Kenyans do not completely mess up the ecosystem of the forest. I want to engage Ima. Ima, if you may make your presentation, followed by Divina. Thank you.
Hello. For
Yes,
me,
Ima,
it's
we can hear you.
not a presentation. It's more of probably an appreciation and then a question. I've really enjoyed this Twitter space. I've really learned a lot from Prof and also from Steve. Probably my question would go to Steve, whereby he talked about something to do with politics and it's equals to economics, something, and ecology. If we could kindly repeat that statement, I'd really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ima, for seeking clarity. I didn't know this guy has a better name, but more day you can come to us and explain what you meant, how politics works in this. In a minute, please.
Okay, thanks, Emma. What I meant was politics equals macroeconomics equals ecology. If you realize politics and macroeconomics is all about how humans use resources, scarce resources to meet unlimited needs. That's how the economists say it. But when you come to ecology, it's where the resources are. The ecosystem is what gives the resources for the humans to use. The problem with economics and politics is that they imagine that the human species is the only one that is benefiting from the ecosystem. And they think that everything has to be money-based. They're looking for markets and all that, everything you hear guys mentioning. We have to grow this because it has a market. We have to do this because it has profits. And the only species that uses money is humans. Every other species trades, every other species produces, every other species consumes, but only one species uses money. That's why we say the ecosystem is the boss and everyone else must comply to it, because once you disobey the ecosystem, everything else and everyone else dies. Thanks.
Thank you. It now makes sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm happy a lot of people are learning from these spaces, and that's what we intend to do. Brief Scoop, you'll be coming later on, but let me give a special recognition to Ronita, who is equally a great champion for food security, and she hosts spaces too. Probably when she has time, she'll be speaking to us. Divina, you have the mic.
Hi. Can
Hello,
you hear
dear.
me?
Welcome to this space, and you can speak to us.
Okay, thank you. What I would want you to say today is I think we need to know the difference between the Shamba system that was there before and what they want to introduce right now. Based on what Rigathi was saying, I think he wants it to be more of how can I put it? Not the subsistence farming, but more of large scale farming. Initially, the Shamba system was for subsistence farming, where now they give just the families and then just for family use. I've seen Shamba systems work in Karatina. I was in Karatina University, and within the forest, the Shamba system was in place. But then after some time, they introduced the one that came with KFS. Is it Pelis or something? Also, that one is still good because we still nature trees in it. But then if you bring the large scale farming in within the forest, then that means that we are also bringing land grabbing. We are bringing things like development encroachment. I'm in the support of Shamba system as much as everyone is against it. I'm in support of the Shamba system, but let's not just dive into the Shamba system. Let's first look at the pros and the cons, why it failed initially, why we don't have it in place at the moment. Because remember, if we are to talk about food being scarce in Kenya, remember our forest only covers like 8%, right? So even if we are to encroach, we will never have enough because it's quite a small chunk and we are leaving a big chunk of arable land just sitting idle. Instead of us utilizing this arable land, we would now want to go to the forest. I think it's more political, and this will now lead to land grabbing. Remember, there was a time for where they wanted to grab Gong Forest. So I think this is just a motion that is being put in place for us now to just slowly get into this phase of now accepting that there's land grabbing. But I don't think that Shamba system is a bad idea. It's just that our implementation as Kenyans is really poor. Thank you.
Shamba system is not bad, implementation is poor, and probably setting out for another land grabbing fiasco, or probably should I call it politics of Shamba grabbing. I want to take this opportunity to welcome Brief Scoop, who is in politics, and I believe he'll be leading us in the next session as he equally makes his submissions. And this is the moment I get to say, get on that share button, just tag Shamba system and share with everybody. Thank you guys for doing that. And Biscup, where are we headed? We have enough large tracts of land that we have not explored. You have been doing agriculture spaces. Do we really need to encroach the forest in order to be food secure? Make your presentation, sir, and take us to the next level.
I was about to start a riot, a demonstration for being the flower girl here, just sitting around. So, as the resident jack of all trades and master of none here, I'm not actually familiar with what the Shamba system is, and it sounds like it used to. It's a known system of farming within the forest. So I'm not going to delve too much into that, but the politics is so clear, of course, right? And so on point with what Maude was explaining to us about what the potential of abuse, because of course, to me, this is the exact opposite of bottom up, right? Bottom up economics is about not just focusing on money and profit, but it is about taking care of everything, including the environment, including conservation. So we cannot, I think it's a false, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a false argument to try and pit the idea of conservation, whether or not we can afford to do conservation versus the idea of food security. And it's absolutely true. In Kenya, we do not lack arable land. The president himself, the current president, has long argued during his campaign, he long argued that the focus was to increase the yield per acre rather than increasing the acreage of land that we are using. So it does not seem that there is a lack of land in use. And by the way, Professor Matilong, so I hear what you're saying with regard to cutting up pieces of land, plots of land into eighths and hundreds by 50s. I don't know if that's an eighth or if that's even less. So there's a lot of that and that of course is not, you cannot use that to farm anything. But what I was countering on the question of subsistence farming, or rather I forget the term you used earlier. I think it was the breaking up. I forget the term you used, but you were suggesting something to do with the breaking up of land into small pieces is a problem. But I wasn't referring to breaking it up to those small pieces for the use of growing concrete buildings, as I think it was Godwin or Geoffrey that said that earlier. What I was arguing in favor of is that we do not need commercial farming. We do not need to get rid of the subsistence farmers, because people with 1 acre, 2 acres should not be excluded from the food security equation. Rather than getting rid of them and having them become employees of large commercial farms, which would eradicate a whole entire ecosystem of a business class that is very vital in food security and in the economy of the country, it is to organize them in cooperatives. But back to this question of the Shamba system. So if there's a traditional way of using forests, which I'm not familiar with, because again, like I said, I'm not familiar with what the Shamba system is. If it's referring to a traditional way of using forest land for producing food, then by all means, traditionally, I do believe, I don't think it's just a belief of mine. I think it is proven by the millennia in which we have used land, that we used land sustainably. And so if that's what we are talking about, then by all means, yes. But of course, it opens up the possibility, as many have suggested, of abuse and land grabs and all of that stuff, which we have seen in previous administrations, and which of course is potential. So that whole argument of Gashagua's is very, to me, I'm very suspicious of it, because it harkens to me to similar arguments coming from right-wing conservatives in the United States and in Europe, where they argue that the only way to have sustainable development, or not sustainable, they don't care about sustainable, the only way to have development and to support the economy is by encroaching in natural lands and in conservation lands. And that's what it sounds like to me. It doesn't sound like bottom up, because bottom up is the exact opposite of that. It is coming from a progressive left-wing angle, where you take care of the population, you take care of those that are at the bottom, but you also don't disregard the environment or conservation, or all of those things that have driven our ecosystems, our natural ecosystems for millennia. So it sounds to me like a purely economic argument, as Maude so eloquently stated for us. And that is not sufficient. It cannot be. Maude is completely right that it has to be, the ecology is king. And by the way, it is king whether or not we acknowledge it or not, right? Because we are seeing already the effects of climate change and what that is doing, including to food security, including to the cost of living, including to even gas prices and energy prices. They lie to us that the only way to have cheaper gas is and gasoline, by the way, when I say gas, or natural gas, is to encroach on the environment. What we see is that when we encroach the environment then fights back, and we end up with expensive gas anyway. So it's not even a solution, even economically. So we have to push back against that. I am not convinced that these pronouncements are things that have been thought through. And I've raised this in other spaces when we've been talking about this administration and some of the pronouncements that they've been doing. And it's true, it does appear that the DP has not, internalized this idea that they have actually won, that they are now in the business of governing, not campaigning. They don't need to campaign for support for their policies. What they need to do is to be enacting policy, good, sound policy that, by the way, does not only need to be enacted by people coming from the Kenya Kwanza side. It should be enacted by all of government, a whole of government approach in consultation with county, governors, county legislators, MCAs, members of parliament. It's something that is going to require an all of government, and actually not just an all of government, but an all of Kenya approach. It's going to require economists. It's going to require, again, as has been stated, ecologists, people who are involved in agriculture, in conservation, and that's the way to govern. It's not by making pronouncements that sound great when uttered in speeches for applause, but then, how do you implement? Now, with regard to the Shamba system, again, if it can be implemented in traditional ways that were done, or not necessarily in the traditional ways that we did it before, but using research. So, for example, we've heard of hemp, we've heard of mushrooms, we've heard of using tree cover for, as alongside with producing decorative what have you, plants and what have you, then so be it. We can add that as an additional farm style, but we cannot get rid of our traditional forest cover, which is essential to the ecosystem. In terms of the politics, just as I wrap up, it does seem like he's playing the politics of economics, but the politics of economics that he's playing is the exact opposite of bottom-up economics, and we will be here to hold him up to it. I yield there.
Thank you so much, Beef Scoop, and for your explanation on how you're looking at this idea of DP actually not understanding he is in government, and whatever he pronounces should be for the betterment of the bottom-up plan that they have for this country. Again, for those who are joining in, we are discussing the issue of conservation vis-a-vis the Shamba system that the DP mentioned in, and with the cost of ensuring Kenya is food secure. We're trying to question if this is ideally a political card that is playing, or is it meant to make us feel more secure? For those who have been following the news, you equally saw the president today flagged off relief food from State House headed to the northern part of Kenya that is currently undergoing drought, and there have been reports of people dying out of starvation. And again, probably this is the moment we call to ourselves as Kenyans and ask, where do we get it wrong? Before I bring back Geoffrey, I just want to engage you, Prof, because you understand very well the politics around the Rift region. You might be having good history on the Mau Forest, Elgeyo Marakwet area, and there's a time that they had to, make sure that those people that are encroaching on forest were being evicted out. There were cries that it was a political move. There were cries that it was about conserving the environment. But as we speak today, we are suffering from, enough water. And I believe it has been, they have tried to address this issue, but politically speaking, are we a government that is keen to ensure food security, or are we creating another backdoor of getting people to grab, what I will call public land, that is the forest? What's your thought, sir?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just probably throw a stone out there, and allow me to start with a sort of an observation of something that is unsettling, to support all the comments that we've said. I mean, it didn't escape my notice that either on the same day or just a day after, the president was speaking in New York, and he was telling the world about the ravages of climate change in Kenya and our commitment as a country, including a commitment to pay a certain amount of money for efforts aimed at, mitigating climate change. And I think just on that same day, it was Rigathi Gachagua who was going out there telling us, hey, wait a minute, we allow the hustlers to go into the forest and start planting and, exploiting the pieces of land that, according to him, are idle in that case. And, that brings me then to the question of what you asked, which is, what was the impact of, or what was this meant to achieve? The story about Mao was one very sad one, because I remember the arguments at that time, and somebody had spoken. One of the former KANU members of parliament asked rhetorically, kwani mvua inatoka juu kwa Mungu ama inatoka kwa miti? And of course he was playing to the gallery, and the gallery of course answered that it came from Mungu. Little did they know that Mungu's rain comes through the trees, because the trees take God's water up to the skies again, and then that's how it is recycled. But and then we went to a point where people were asking, which one is important? Is it people or is it trees? And I think that was the point we were missing there. And if you remember, a couple of years later, there is a river that flows from the Mau through Salga in Nakuru towards Lake Baringo. It basically dried. And then people were asking, oh, we don't have water, this river is dried, what are we going to do? And somebody said, remember the story, mvua inatoka kwa Mungu ama inatoka kwa miti. And it sounded funny for those of us who are listening to the sort of exchanges in vernacular, but the reality was that people were underscoring the impact of basically human activity in destroying forest cover and the attendant consequence of erratic rains, extended dry spells, and sometimes erratic rains going to the other side, which is very heavy, nothing to break the runoffs, and therefore sweeping villages and families down the drain. So what was Gachagua trying to do? In my opinion, Gachagua was not talking to the middle class. He wasn't talking to you and me. He wasn't talking to the guys who live in Nairobi or Nakuru or Eldoret or Kisumu. Rigathi Gachagua was trying to do what he does best, which is campaign, as we've all said. According to him, he's not yet done with campaigning. He still imagines there is a Uhuru presidency, and then he has to pronounce a populist sort of declaration to rub the salt on Uhuru. And therefore, he was actually offering something to the hustlers by saying, hey, you know what, hustlers, now you can go and farm in the forest because here it is free. Go and get your food there. And I think that's what we said. How do we get food to grow in the forests without destroying the canopies and opening up the tree cover to allow light to penetrate in order for us to obey the basic science of photosynthesis? Because that's what is basically required by plants. You need light for plants to be able to grow and utilize both air and water to manufacture their food, if you like, in very basic terms. So I don't think Gachagua was talking to the middle class. He wasn't talking to the millionaire class, which he is one of them, or a billionaire even. He was basically trying to make a populist pronouncement to show the hustlers that, hey, yes, we didn't supplement or we didn't subsidize the fuel costs. We didn't subsidize the maize flour, but we are offering you something. Smile now. Go into the forest and start producing your food. We have subsidized fertilizer. Never mind that it is the wrong time to plant in some regions in the country. That's how I think.
Wow. Okay, Professor, interesting that you mentioned it is not time to plant for some regions, especially with the kind of crop we all depend on to produce food for us. I had indicated that I'll welcome Geoffrey to speak to us. Geoffrey, I know you might be ready, but if you don't mind me asking Maurice to quickly come in and give us his perspective on this idea of Shamba system that the DP is fronting and idea of giving us food. Is this something that is more political than practical in matters environment conservation? Or should we just say it is a golden opportunity to produce more food to our country? Maurice, and then I will ask Kiptenai to speak, and then we can go back to you, Geoffrey. And guys, 5 minutes tops. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, Eli, if you don't mind. So, by the way, did anyone actually define what this Shamba system is for us? Did I just miss that? So, if not, I hope Maurice will do that. But before we move on to Maurice, let me ask the professor something on his presentation. Professor Matilong, you were saying that he's campaigning, he's speaking to a certain crowd. My question to you is, and it's a bit of a rhetorical question, isn't the best campaign good policy? And so if the best campaign is good policy, if this policy backfires, what then? For Matlong, before we move on quickly.
Sorry, I'm biting a very strong carrot here.
Sorry.
I think campaigns are not supposed to, or campaign promises are not supposed to be fulfilled. Let's all agree. Secondly, campaigning, and you are in the US, you know this. Campaigning is like marketing. You don't appeal to logic. If you do, you lose. You appeal to the emotions. You talk to the reptilian mind. You tell them here is something which is causing you damage and fear, but I'm here, I'm going to take care of it. So I think he's basically trying to do that. To him, he's going to keep doing that. So if you want to take it from me, William will always be playing the statesman, but Rigathi will be playing the bad cop. That's what we saw during the inauguration. That's what we have just seen now. And going forward, he's going to be doing exactly that because that's what he's good at doing. He wants to be, I am the son of Mau Mau, I fear nothing. And he's going to basically rough up everything and keep, because if you don't say what he said, the hustlers will begin to think, wait a minute, we were told on the 10th of August, maize flour will cost 70 shillings. It's not costing 70 shillings. Day 8 or is it 9 after the inauguration, maize flour is still at 200 plus. We were told on the 10th of August there would be an NHIF card. There isn't an NHIF card. We were told on the 10th of August the port will go back to Mombasa. That happened somehow.
Well, Professor, your view is somewhat cynical, and I think it's unfortunate if that is really where we are headed, because I really do believe, personally, I do believe that good policy is good campaigning. But I think I hear you on what you're saying. I hope you're wrong. Let's see. I'm sorry, Maurice, go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. The big scoop and my good friend Eli. Always enjoy coming to this space, even though it comes in when I should be working. So, so always fun. So I just want to join in and a little bit disagree with Dr. Serone. Actually, not necessarily disagree, but just have a little point of departure. I do agree with Dr. Serone that campaign.
Bwana Maurice, this is work. Kazi ni kazi.
Kazi ni kazi. By the way, this is our work, right? We as journalists, all we do is have fun and talk, do stuff like this. Okay, anyway. So, Dr. Serone, I think I agree with you that campaigns are about appealing to emotions more than logic. So, none is more apparent than the Donald Trump campaign. But I disagree that campaign promises are not designed to be fulfilled. I think good policy requires for you to make an effort to fulfill your campaign promises. So I think maybe you misspoke there. You said that they're not always fulfilled, but I think saying they are not meant to be fulfilled is a little bit misleading. As far as the Shamba system is concerned, somebody asked me to define it. The Shamba system, the way I understand it, is where the local people, where there's a forest, allowed to farm in the forest in condition that they plant trees alongside their crops. And then after 3 years or something, a certain time, they have to give back the land. So they bring in, they grow their food, they harvest, and they have food for them to eat and maybe some extra to sell. And then at the same time, they replenish the forests. And if it works perfectly, then everything should be okay. But from what I have seen, it never works the way they are saying it's going to work. But it's one of those things that you say that people have good intentions, but intentions don't necessarily translate into good outcomes. As far as Rigathi is concerned, Riggy G, as is known now, I'm finding him really hilarious. One of the things that a lot of people are making a big miscalculation about Rigathi Gachagua is very smart. He's a very, very smart guy. He's not as some people think that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But he has fashioned himself. He wants to fashion himself as this guy who can say anything. He's unleashed to speak for the government. He's still in his campaign mode, and he's gonna make pronouncements like that. Okay? In the U.S. politics, we call those trial balloons to see where people are. And what I don't understand is why he's doing it now, because they're supposed to be very busy enjoying their honeymoon period. Okay, the honeymoon period in politics usually would last about 3 months, and then after the honeymoon period, things really start getting real. But it seems as if they're squandering their honeymoon period by getting into these combative stories that are getting into the forest argument, and now they have all this some Azimio bunge la wananchi people have gone to the IEBC offices to confront the IEBC for trying to remove the 4 commissioners who dissented against Chebukati, and they were tear gassed. So there's all this squandering of honeymoon period, which does not make any sense for me. So the politics of forestry, if we are to look at what Wangari Maathai fought for, I mean, you would find that to be not a very good way of spending your first months. They should be spending their first months into solidifying their position, announcing the cabinet, and giving Kenyans the direction of where their new government is going. As far as Dr. William Ruto is concerned, I think he's off to a good start himself. I think his speech over at the UN was decent. He needed a lot more teeth and substance, but it was a good start. He presented very well. And I think people are more and more gaining confidence in him as a leader. So time will tell where he goes, but I think he's off to a good start.
Thank you, Maurice. I was waiting on Brief Scoop to actually scoop you out, but he's just being lazy, and therefore I won't call on him. He might
he's being a journalist. He's probably looking at his Twitter account.
What a way to say that. Thank you so much for your observation, Maurice. You might just be right, because I texted him and he decided not to respond. Captain I will welcome you to the space. You can speak to us on this subject matter, and after you we will take maybe a quick Q&A and respond to some of the messages you guys are sending in the chat board. Can kindly continue engaging us with the hashtag Shamba System.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts and also to listen to great minds from colleagues here. So from my perspective, I look at this thing from the following perspective. One, I'll try to understand the pronouncement from the DP from the social, the economic, and also the environmental point of view. Then I'll also look at the politics around that. So my understanding, and I think from Morris, he has defined what Shamba system is, and there's one thing that maybe like he missed out. Shamba system is actually meant to allow communities that are living around the forest communities to do some subsistence farming, but only on plantations. So the moment I logged in, I had there was a speaker who was sharing and saying that the only problem that we have as a country rests on our weaknesses to implement the existing policies. And I can share some examples. There are policies that prohibit us from farming along rivers. It gives us like a buffer of 30 meters from that. And I think so the failure for us to implement these policies is what makes this thing fail. But from my perspective, I strongly believe that if this thing is implemented well, and I think there's a lot of there's a lot of experiment that has already been done, and I believe that the country can take the lesson learned from that and implement the Shamba system in a good way. Then the benefit that comes from this is multi-pronged, maybe I can say that. So the social bit of it, where the local communities will be able to do farming, they'll be engaged in activities that will generate some resources to them, and they can earn some money. So that links to the economics of it, and the economics now brings the financial resources to these families, and also they are busy. So there are folks in the village. There are folks in the villages who, like, whose source of source of income is mainly coming from being Shamba boys, for instance, or doing some activities in the farms. There is no mining in those areas. There's no businesses that can be very productive. So for me, I look at that angle. Then when it comes to environmental contribution, now I've been privileged to work with the Kenya Forest Service on certain programs, and also some government department and Ministry of Environment, where we've been able to do some mapping and also to try to quantify the amount of carbon that are either released or sequestered due to land use, land cover changes. And the country actually decided that the regions where we have like plantations, those regions are not considered to be having changes. So the moment like those trees are harvested, the portion is still considered like a plantation. Then the moment the land cover changes to cropland, the government decided that that still remains a plantation. So there's no carbon changes. There are no carbon changes in that, other than when it is converted to something else for a very long period of time. And we understand that the plantation will only, so the moment they are harvested, when the land is allocated to a local community, they'll do the plantation. They'll do the planting of maybe either bananas or beans or potatoes, and within 3 to 5 years, then the trees have already grown. So that is my understanding. Then, in terms of politics, I agree with most of you, because you look at the DP in a way that is still campaigning. But in my view, there's a statement that he said at the last, towards the end of his statement, I think he said that they'll bring on board a CS or a Minister of Environment who knows what he's supposed to do. And I believe that that means that they'll bring someone who looks at things from a vantage point where he'll be looking at all these points, that is social, economics, environment, and also the politics of the day. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Captain I, for your presentation, and I do appreciate you. Something important you mentioned is the DP was quick to note that after his pronouncement, they will be bringing in the CS and the technocrats who knows what to do. I'm just imagining probably it would have been better to go into consultation before announcing this move. But then again, it's politics. It's what they do best. Let's just have a brief scoop. You have some messages you want to read out before you go to the next segment, which will be bringing us to the conclusion.
Sure. Let's look at some messages from the audience. I think you had read up to the professor's last submissions. And by the way, Maude actually also did post his the summary of the explanation he was giving us between the difference between forest cover and tree cover. So look at that. And I also do have questions about that, by the way, but I'll come to that in a minute. Other contributions. I have personally seen from Miss Fifiture, I have personally seen the adverse effects of Shamba systems. PELIS, I guess, is another word for Shamba system. And she's talking about around Imenti Forest, all the indigenous trees were cut down. The area is loaded with one species, Cypress lustanica trees, and no undergrowth. And cypress, I think, is exotic to this country. And I think that's what she's suggesting. Because it's not, it's not indigenous, and it's not one of those. It's a softwood, right? If I'm not mistaken. And then I have our own Ronita. Well, I call her our own Ronita because we do a lot of things together. She does her own spaces on Thursday around the SDGs. I don't think all promises made during campaigns are marketing and just emotions. That's a bit generalistic, and I like to think, this is me editorializing, I like to think that many of them are actually pledged because they will inform policy, and good policy, or at least what you think is good policy. And then Davina says, I think we should hold politicians more accountable, which I think is what we're doing in this space. Tionda says, please don't mistake urban understanding of forest sustainability and local, two different analogies. I would be curious to know what his view of the urban understanding of forest sustainability is compared to local. And I guess when by local, he means of the people who live around forests. And then we have Dominic Biwat, who says the Shamba system was abused. I think a lot of people have alluded to that, with illegal loggings and clearing of trees to create space for planting crops, and this is expected to happen if it's allowed. Somebody said, I second Maude, I do too. And then Ambrose Mbunya just had claps for all of you guys. I think all of you should pat yourselves in the back. By the way, our conversations continue to be extremely enriching, extremely profound, and enlightening to all of us. So yeah, I agree with Mbunya there. So clap, hand on the back to all of us, to all of you guys in the audience, both listening and contributing and sharing your thoughts on the chat. And before we move on, I would like to ask Kiptanai, you just finished presenting sort of a very unemotional view, I guess, of what politics, economics of it is. But my question to you, I guess, is, is it good policy at all in the first place? And secondly, I guess the question we are really trying to get at is this not a false argument? This idea that we need to farm in trees for food, what is it called? Food security. Is it not possible to have food security in Kenya with the arable land that is already existing, considering that we do very little water harvesting? We literally, if we could this is my view, if we could harvest the water that we get during the rainy season, including times when we are having floods, including in places like Northeastern, we would have enough water to farm all of the land across the whole country, including land that is currently not used. So I know it's a very leading question. I meant to make it a little more open, but I'll let you have a go at it.
Before he comes in, Brief Scoop, if you allow me, I will equally want to compile that with something that Maude said in the chat section, and I read it out. Please note, none of the food relief, the relief food is imported. It is all locally sourced, meaning we are already growing enough food. So food insecurity is not about production, but distribution. And something that one of the speakers actually alluded to, I believe his name was Tiondo or something. Maybe we can equally have a reaction to that. A minute or two will do, if you don't mind.
Maybe I can go first. So the question that was asked was whether we can produce enough food outside those forests. And my response to that will be, yes, it is possible. And I can just share that like over the weekend, I came from Malawi, where we had a workshop on a program or a project that's being run across Africa by IFAD, dubbed the resilient food system. And we were lucky to go across 2 districts there where they're implementing some irrigation programs. One is for 310 hectares, and another one is for 10,000 hectares, which is split into 2 programs. So the question that is it possible for us to produce food outside the protected or maybe the plantation? I affirm it is yes. Now the question that comes or the question that follows now is the investment that comes from that. So, for instance, for the 310 hectares that was being implemented, the program was costing the donors around $3 million. So my understanding is that it is possible to do that, but again, do we have the resources to do that across the country, or are we able to do that sustainably within a protected within plantation? And my response to that is that there's a Galana Kulalu program that we did in Kenya. That program failed, and I don't understand why it failed. I don't know whether it was due to lack of a proper feasibility study to understand whether those areas can actually produce maize in a productive way. So that is a question maybe for another day or another discussion. But my understanding is that if we can do like proper feasibility analysis to understand the possible areas that this can be done, that will be possible. And then there's someone who has just said that Kenya, we don't have a problem like with food. The problem that we have is with the distribution. And I can partially agree with that, because if we go to the western part of the country, that is, if you go to Trans Nzoia, you go to Bungoma, Kakamega, those regions, we produce a lot of maize, because that is my home county, and we store them for several months until maybe May or June the coming year. Then, because of the markets, we eventually sell them at a loss. Then the other option that is there is for us to sell our maize to the National Cereal Boards, which again has its own issues with the delayed payment. There's corruption there. So my understanding is that, like, if we have policies that will ensure that food distribution is done properly, the National Cereal Board is able to have the mandate and the resources, and also they should be checked to ensure that the food that they get is distributed when it is necessary. So, for me, I feel it's so unfortunate that our colleagues in the the northern part of the country are lacking food, yet we have food in the other parts of the country. So that is another discussion, and I think that goes to value chains where things are gotten from the farms and how it goes through the various steps up to the consumer. Then the other question for me, I think, was whether Shamba system is a good policy. My understanding is that we've done a lot of trials in this. I remember when I was very young, I heard stories from my grandparents that back in 80s and 70s, Mount Elgon, because that is my home, Mount Elgon, there's a place called Chepkitale, and there was a lot of farming in that region. There were people living in those regions, and actually a number of people were born there, and they later moved to Bungoma and other regions. They have very good stories of the development they were able to attain. So most of them were able actually to get resources and also buy land elsewhere. That's Bungoma, Kimilili, and other regions because of being allowed to farm in the forest. And I can say that during those years, the trees were there. The only challenge that I've seen now in the recent past is when the pellet system was introduced. Now, and this boils to the issues that I was saying, just being able to implement the policies that we have. So someone is allocated a piece of land to do the farming, is given the seedlings to plant, but because this fellow knows that after 5 to 6 years, the trees will be at a height that will chase him from that piece of land, they make sure that they make the seedling or they kill the seedlings. So my understanding is that if we have policies and laws, for instance, that says if you've been allocated a plantation and the plantation dies, there's a penalty that you pay. Then through GIS and remote sensing, because I'm someone who knows GIS and remote sensing work, there are regions that can be mapped and said that those regions cannot be cultivated. For instance, when you look at the river banks, because the farming, so from my end, I understand that of course there are negative impacts that happens when farming is done in plantation, for instance, siltation, and I've seen that happen, but that can be easily arrested when we have like a buffer along like all rivers or all the gullies within those areas, so that is protected. So that is my response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiptanai. And brief scoop, just give me a second. I'd like to engage Geoffrey in this. Geoffrey, you've heard what Kiptanai says about mapping some of the regions, including where you cannot practice farming. We have heard equally about the idea of irrigation. Why is it the northern part of Kenya, despite how many tracts of land they have, we cannot find a crop that can easily grow in that region? Are we lacking the science? Are we lacking the resources? Or are we just lazy in thinking how to secure the northern part of Kenya in matters food security? Geoffrey.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me appreciate the knowledge that is dripping in here. It's very resourceful. Now, for me, I will think about this in terms of the cost, because now if we talk about irrigating the land in the northern region, maybe the people who have the expertise, how much it will cost to manage such kind of a program, and for how long before it becomes beneficial for the entire country. That is how I'll respond to that. But again, going back to the Shamba system, the agroforestry, it is very important to remember that agroforestry did not begin at independence, not the Moi government. agroforestry started with the colonial government. That is as far as 1906. And one of the reasons why it was preferred at that particular point of time, because the research showed that forest land is very fertile, in exception of places where you have maybe plantation or trees like pine, which you'll find a lot of acidity in the soil. So due to that, from the inception in 1906, it worked very well. The Shamba system, the agroforestry worked very well. So if it worked from 1906 to the point where it was hijacked by politicians who bought huge tracts of land, for example, in Mau Forest, fragmented it and sold it to other people, we should be asking ourselves that if it worked for all those so many years, why shouldn't it work now? All right. And from the deliberations and the discussions that have been going here, there's one constant word that I've been hearing: indiscipline. That the main reason why we should back off from this system is because of the indiscipline, particularly of the political class. And then Kiptenai also mentioned that farmers can also be indisciplined in a manner in which if you are located a piece of land in the forest, maybe you will feel entitled to a certain point that it is yours and you'll have problems living after a certain period of time. Now, this is my concern, that we keep on mentioning this word indiscipline whenever government brings out a policy or something government wants to implement. For example, the other day when money for the fertilizer subsidy was released, there are forums even on Twitter here which were discussing and saying this is an avenue for the government to steal money. During the last government, the government that has just left office, when the fuel subsidy was being implemented, we heard of the same story. So every time something comes out, we hear of this word indiscipline. And I keep on asking myself, should we hold ourselves hostage to this indiscipline thing, that anytime something comes out from the executive arm of the government, that the first thing we think about is that we are so indisciplined, this one will not work? Isn't it time now for us to start discussing how do we propel this society of ours? How would we hold the politicians accountable so that they're disciplined enough so that when such policy comes out, for example, the Shamba discipline, they do not hijack the process for their own benefit? How do we become disciplined as a nation, as a people, ordinary people, that when this system, for example, is implemented, that we do not become selfish ourselves, the people who benefit for it, that we hijack process and we turn it from a process that will benefit us into something else. So for me, I think it is important as we discuss these issues, we also hold ourselves like accountable. Like, how are we going to manage? How are we going to deal with this word that keeps on popping every time we're discussing government policies, this word indiscipline? Thank you very much.
If I may, in here, I feel like for so much of policy that we discuss or about anything happening in Kenya, or not even just in Kenya, but anywhere in Africa, I think we have this approach of, we have a tendency to treat everything we discuss as if it is always a question of moral failing. And from my experience in living in the West, not just in the United States, but in other places in the West, people in these places aren't any more ethical or moralistic than anybody anywhere else that I've been. I think what I observe is that what they do in the United States and in Western Europe, where things function quite well, arguably in terms of in terms of state run policies, for the most part, right, run quite well, is that I think what they do is they incentivize the behavior. They lead people to behave in a certain way by providing incentives. And so my question is there, I guess what I'm trying to say to us is we should be challenging ourselves as policymakers. I'm not a policymaker, I'm just a journalist who writes about what everybody is doing. But how can we incentivize the behaviors that we want, in order to have the outcomes that we want to see? Because I think that is what works. I don't think that there are any group of people that have a percentage of more ethically or morally upright people than any other group. And so, given that line of challenging ourselves about finding solutions that use incentives, I guess my other question is, to look at this from the other side. Is there a way to do the Shamba system in a responsible way? How did we do it traditionally? Because I have a lot of faith in our traditional values and systems. Did we farm sustainably in indigenous forests? And what is the place of research, modern research, to supplement and introduce foods perhaps that do well, like mushrooms? And by the way, I think for me, as somebody from the Nairobi area, I thought that mushrooms were a Western thing, as in Western world, but I came to find out later that actually there are Kenyan communities that have always used mushrooms traditionally. So that's one food. We also heard of hemp. I think the only hand I'm seeing up is Mao. So why don't you go ahead?
A brief scoop as Mao comes in. I would like to equally confirm that I've grown eating how you call them, the fungi or whatever, the mushroom, and it was quite a delicacy. We didn't have to buy meat. So I don't know which Kenya you grew in, but I can't blame you. You're a town boy. I will equally ask Professor Matilong to come in after Mao and just explain to me one thing. Why are we so reserved on growing maize and saying we need ugali? I've never got a greater answer, and I hope probably you can help me understand that. So we'll have Mao and probably Prof to come in, and the other two guests will come in later.
Yeah, thanks again for the mic. About incentivizing people, I fully agree with what Brief Scope was saying and our previous speaker. If you want trees, I've posted an infographic there showing that if you want trees to grow, not just to be planted, but to be grown, you have to tie it to what the politician wants. You have to incentivize him. So the idea here is to give every post that you're vying for, you must grow a certain number of trees before you vie, not after you have qualified and you have passed the campaign. Before you vie, when you're taking your papers to IEBC, you allocated a piece of land, which again is GIS based. It has been mapped out. It has been given coordinates. You're told, go and plant trees here and make sure they grow until they establish. And then when you've planted this number of trees, now you come and vie. That is where now you'll find that those politicians will go and get the Shamba system people, the subsistence farmers, and tell them, I need to grow 100,000 trees before I can vie. So you come, I split the area I've been given to you guys, you grow these trees, and then now I can be able to qualify to vie. The second thing that I wanted to say was about water harvesting. Guys usually think our ASALs do not receive enough water for them to do irrigation. And irrigation is not those big Galana Kulalu schemes that you see on TV. Those are political gimmicks and economics guys trying to show us that this thing has to be grand and it has to be big scale for us to make an impact. If you look at India, there's a TED talk by Anupam Mishra, whose link I will post. India have been doing this thing for centuries. They live in deserts, not even arid and semi-arid areas. They live in deserts in South India. And there they use traditional system to harvest water, and they have enough food to feed themselves in the desert and even to supply themselves water without even digging a single borehole. They use only traditional systems. The simplest thing we can do is to get 40 Indians or 50 Indians from South India. They come explain to us how they do it there. We do it, and then we see how we can use subsistence farmers to grow our crops. Large-scale farming is not sustainable at all. Farming using fertilizers is not sustainable at all. Farming using borehole water is not sustainable at all, or mechanized farming, because you rely on petroleum and you rely on petroleum products, which are the fertilizers. If you use subsistence farming, you'll feed yourself, and India is proper proof. When they tried to use industrialized farming, they went under famine and most of them died. But as soon as they reverted to the traditional systems, they recovered. Thanks.
A man after my own heart. I'm an absolute advocate for subsistence farming. Eli, I don't remember the order. Over to you.
I don't blame you, sir. Keep tweeting. Hashtag is Shamba System. Let's have Professor coming in, followed by Muindi and Pastor Esmond. Prof. Matalong, Serone, probably you can hear us. Okay, maybe he's still chewing on his carrot. Let's have Muindi coming in, please. And I had to ask a question. Do we really need to depend on Mahindi and Ugali throughout to make sure we have food secure? Muindi, maybe you might want to answer that and make a presentation of your own. Kindly proceed.
Hello guys, so it's been an honor being on this Twitter space, and I'm really learning a lot, especially on those Mao Days infographics. I really love them, and the way they are totally put out open, and the way the details are being shown. Quick one, I had a question first before I try give my sentiments on the question that you've asked recently. I asked on the chat space about everyone can see that our nation, or rather our country, Kenya, specifically Nairobi, is facing a lot of urban development, and there's a lot of what do I say? People are migrating from one point to another, and the population is really increasing at a very high rate. And this increase of population of people, as compared to Kitambo, people are not that many, and then you'll see like people will do will farm in forest, and they will not destroy like large quantities of forest, and then they it's like they had a certain knowledge of doing the Shamba system thing. I don't know how they are doing it, but I asked that even if the government has strict policies on how to do the Shamba system, will it really happen, considering the huge number of people and the way the population is growing day by day? I'll try answer the question that you asked about, do we really have to have unga or maize as our main source of food? My 2 cents are we don't have to really depend on maize or flour as our source of food. We also have other sources of is it starch or carbohydrate? So we can try implement them and try do other sources of starch apart from other sources of carbohydrate apart from maize flour or unga. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. And you agree with me, we can look for alternative sources of starch, and probably you call it unga. Let's have you, Pastor Esmond, make your presentation, and probably take a very last comments from Anita and Maurice in that order.
And I think just to highlight the question from Muindi, he's asking, how do we, is it possible to regenerate even as urban migration is happening? So If there's anybody that has an answer, or if you're, if while you're presenting, you have an answer to that, I'd love to hear it too. I have my own thoughts on that, of course. Maurice, go ahead.
Thank you. Finally working, sir. Thank you. Thank you for noting that. Pastor Esmond, please.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Eli. Great discussions, and as always, I appreciate everybody doing this good work. Now, I know we've heard that this, the chambers system, of course, started back in the 1900s, and I think in the 1910, when the colonial system, through the non-residential cultivation program, really, ended up having people integrated into the system, where the cultivators were integrated, and at some point they were being absorbed as resident workers in the forest department. And obviously that changed in 1975 when they were employed on a permanent basis and working in there. Of course, there's been a lot of changes. The system being banned, being reinstated, being banned, and all that. 1986 it was banned. 1994 it was reinstated. 2003 it was banned, and we have had a lot of other changes. For example, if you look at 1996, the allocation to the forest department was 390 million shillings, and that declined to 95 million by the year 2004. When you look at all the things that I've done, I think one of the other failures that we had is that even the survival of the seedling declined from 90% to 10%. Mismanagement, land grabbing, people taking, actually, some people who had been allocated plots in that system, they actually started selling them. They actually sold the plots and all that. But I would want to say, as I think the previous speakers have spoken, is that the way it was presented by the deputy president, it needs to be relooked at, in the sense that, what are we trying to solve? Are we trying to solve the food problem, or are we trying to increase the issue of forests, or are we trying to do both? Because if the concept of people don't have food because they don't have a place to cultivate, I think that is extremely debatable. I don't think that's the reason. The issue of food security in Kenya is totally different from the aspect of where people are lacking where to farm and all those things. There's enough there's enough land that we can cultivate. It's not utilized. It's a whole mess. It's a story for another day. But the Shamba system, we have success rates or success stories in Africa, which a good example I can give you, the Central Africa Forest Initiative. That's in, I think it's in Virunga National Park in DRC. They have employed that, and it's worked well. And there's also this, the No Forest Sustainable Management in Tanzania. I think it's important. My suggestion is that participatory forest management, that's PFM, it's a good move, but I don't think at this point it is practical in Kenya. We simply have bad habits. I don't think we know how to exist even with one another, leave alone to exist with trees. I don't even know how much of a discipline that we need to put in place in order for somebody to see that I'm supposed to be here to help the trees grow, as opposed to increase and pull out these trees so they can plant more, corn and stuff like that. So I think there's a danger to that. Let us solve the food crisis away from the issue of forests, and let's probably bring in a very good mechanism management. Let's even use I'm sorry to say this, but let's use even the military that are waiting. They're trained, they are disciplined, they are waiting. Of course, we don't have thank God, of course, now we've sent some more troops, but we don't have, we have sufficient people that can work there in the trees. It's been used elsewhere. We have enough people from NYS that can do that. Let's just separate the two. Let's increase our tree cover. Let's separate the two and grow this. The worst case scenario, should we go in that direction of the Shamba system, which I'm thinking probably now, the way the deputy put it looks like it's already a decided move. It didn't look like he's asking for our participation in any way. He simply made a declaration. If that is what has happened, then we really need to increase these kind of conversations for people to understand, and a good mechanism in which these things can be monitored. Remember, in the 1975, the issue was that you were allocated this land, you were absorbed as an employee of a forest department, and you were, I think, supposed to be paid for 9 months. And then in that period, you help, based on success and all that. So there's a lot of things that have been written. I've been trying to read on it. I've been trying to research on it. In fact, even the work that has been done by the Forest Department also is all documented out there. Let's be sober in this. Let's engage the public. Let's have public participation. Let's not create another crisis of land grabbing. Wangari Maathai opposed the Shamba system. I've seen a lot of other people writing out there. Ahmed Nasir. I've seen Dr. Miguna. I've seen other people posting that, and of course there are others supporting it. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Needs deliberation. But appreciate every input.
Thank you so much, Pastor Esmond, with the fact that you mentioned that there are a lot of quarters that are definitely against this idea, and some of the quarters are supporting to have this idea implemented. You equally not, probably it's already decided, but still a lot of questions more than answers. We have Anita, who is an environmentalist, and I don't know if she's in support of this Shamba system. I would love to find a perspective on it, and then followed by Maurice. Anita.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the Twitter space, and apologies, I came in late, so I want to apologize in advance in case I repeat something that was said before. So just to start with the last point that the previous speaker spoke about is that we have most people who are also against it. And also, sadly, many people in conservation are also supporting the same. I am in a group of forest and landscape restoration CSOs, and I have seen some of the people who've been there since way back saying that the system works and that it should be introduced and all that. And first of all, to look at the issue of food insecurity is that we are not food insecure because people are not farming inside the forest. That is one thing that I believe. And secondly, I don't know if I'm about to sound political because I'm also a politician, but to me, I felt like it was also a target on Mau Forest. I don't know why, but I felt like it was a direct target, as it's the forest that has had, if you listen to the speech well, there was a mention of the CS and all that. And if you're keen, you realize that the former CS, or rather maybe outgoing, I don't know if he'll be retained, was also keen on conserving Mau Forest. And then another thing is that today on Facebook, I was checking, I was just passing, I was just scrolling through Facebook, and I saw a former member of parliament who was allegedly mentioned in the Kiambu forest land grabbing issue, doing a live video on Facebook telling people why Shamba system works. So, I mean, that alone is enough to answer a lot of questions on why it is coming back. I'm also a firm, I'd say a strong believer and supporter of everything that Wangari Maathai fought for. She was a key person in conservation. And at one point, she realized that this is not working. So I don't have any reason to also say that it is going to work. If you look at this Shamba system, what happens is that people are given a chance to farm in the forest, but then with time, people relocate and move to the forest. That's why we have people living in gazetted areas for forest. So I think it is not going to work in Kenya. It's something that is going to be misused. And also, just to say, it's the simplest way to get through the forest, because through common mwananchi, because I believe majority of the people, especially those living around the forest, will find this as something positive. So to me, I feel like it's a way of getting to the forest using the common mwananchi. And then lastly, I am in another group that I think one of the listeners is here, Cyprian, in case you won't get a chance. But there's also a message that he shared today that I felt is also something that maybe I should share. He said that Pelis has been abused by both farmers and KFS officers. The Mamanet water tower is a classical example. The system is retrogressive and unsustainable. Central Kenya leads in both tree and forest cover, not because they were allowed to establish farms within the forest, but because almost every home decided to establish tree plantations within their farmlands. And if we allow people to get into the forest in the name of nurturing trees, in another 5 years, the deterioration of our catchment area will double. And then also looking at most of the times, the trees planted in the process of shamba system are exotic trees that are then harvested after 10 years. So for me, I feel like it's also taking commercial forestry to places where we should have forests that should not be harvested. Thank you. Those are my inputs.
Thank you so much, Anita. And I must agree with you that there's a lot of politics that will come into it. So I think you're mentioning about CS Kiraiko Tobiko, if that's the name. I believe that's the CS you're mentioning about, who has been on the lookout on matters forest. Maurice, politics or no politics, we must agree it will come into play. The DP is definitely going to be loud on everything that pertains the well-being of the big wigs, especially after saying that he was a targeted person in the past regime. Do we see a situation of politicians making this a game of numbers and definitely taking advantage and probably voting in favor of having encroachment of our forests? And if not, how can Kenyans actually repel against this if it is not for the benefit of the population?
Yeah, I mean, Rigathi is a politician and he plays very good. He plays his politics very well. He has cultivated a bombastic style, which many Kenyans are beginning to actually accept. Not necessarily like, but most people are starting to accept that that's his style and that's what works for him. But I want to go back to what Anita and Pastor Esmond have talked about. I think Anita is an expert on this topic, and Pastor Esmond is a very, very good researcher. So I tend to believe Pastor Esmond's analysis on things, and Anita, as a resident expert, I'm also inclined to accept her argument on this. And one of the key things that jumped out at me is the slippery slope that we might be finding ourselves engaging in by allowing people to go out and start cultivating in the forest. So we have to be careful because usually the Kenyan politics has turned out to be a three-dimensional chess where somebody is telling you one thing, but he knows if you make that move, this is how they're going to benefit from it. So at this point, we have to worry about what could happen if those lands are not used the way they are supposed to. And I'm inclined to think that if we allow people to start cultivating the land, the next thing they're going to do, as Anita has alluded to, is they're going to want to settle there. And then after that, we're going to have a squatter issue. And then we're going to have a land reclamation issue. And then we're going to have those exotic plants, trees that are planted that we want to come and harvest and turning our forest into a commercial area. So the slippery slope is something we should be concerned about. And then I'm thinking also the politicians are going to get back into the ping pong game of talking about the forestry as a campaign issue, which sometimes has led to some very sensitive outcomes. So that's my contribution there.
Thank you so much. Brief soup.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to make my own attempt at answering Mwindi's question about, allowing people to farm forests in view of urbanization. And my view is that because, as I think has been alluded by others, that there's no shortage of arable land in Kenya. The shortage, and there's also no shortage of food, apparently. And I think people are agreeing with that. There's issues with distribution. There's arable land. And I think people are moving to cities like Nairobi, Nakuru, the big cities, Kisumu, Eldoret, others, Mombasa, because there's a lot of incentives, or at least perceived incentives to do so. And I think that the way to solve that problem of overcrowding, and we see the informal settlements that arise all around these cities because of people coming for work in these cities, but then living in these cities is so expensive that you have no choice but to find yourself in informal settlements as your place to live. I think the answer is to attempt reverse migration through incentives, through incentivizing subsistence farming, and it can be done. We haven't done enough of it here in Kenya. We've sort of just accepted urban migration as a given. We've done nothing to incentivize people returning. There's a lot of Kenyans who actually already own land that is arable in the different counties, in our villages that we come from. And there's very little being done in terms of research, in terms of providing incentives, and in terms of making farming profitable or even sustainable, even for a small family, right? So I think that is the solution, and it's worked. And I'll say it has worked according to what people have told me, that I've spoken to people from Zimbabwe, people from Eritrea, in terms of keeping people in rural, not just keeping people in rural areas, but actually getting people to return. And we see farming becoming an attractive venture again, with young Kenyans who are doing all kinds of innovative digital farming. I'll hand it over to you, Eli, or shall we just go on to Maude? You've got your hand up. Why don't you go on, Maude? You have your hand up. I'm guessing you have some input on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I would like to say is a lot of people who you consider experts, sorry to say, are not experts. They just happen to have commented on the topic, and now they have become the people who people refer to. For instance, when we say that rural-urban migration is a problem, sorry to say, it's not a problem. It's one of the best things that can happen in ecosystems, because you concentrate human population and reduce the carbon footprint. When you spread people around, you have to move very far to get services to them and to get even food to them. When you concentrate them in one area, it's very easy to get services to them and to get food to them. So the idea that people should spread around the country is not a good idea. Let people come to urban areas and then let people farm and bring the food to urban areas. In fact, the closer the farm is to the urban area, and if you can even get that farm inside the urban area, the better it is. You eat your food, you generate waste from it. That waste is used there and then to grow the food which you eat. No distance covered, it's right there. That's even why the reason Kabete is very successful, Kiambu County, because it is right next to Nairobi, where most of the population is. If you look at the people in Kisii, they have a lot of food. The only people they can sell to is people in Kisumu, who are not a big population like Nairobi is. Kabete is much less fertile than Kisii, but we get people in Kabete get more money because Nairobi is right here. So what we are boiling down to, and what is I always keep saying, is urban planning. If we plan our cities well and we plan our country well, we'll have sustainable urban farming, and we'll have sustainable cities, and we'll have much more area freed up for the forests. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Mao. We can have a longer conversation on that, because I definitely have definite thoughts on that. And I do think that diversifying the urban crawl, or I think is what it's called, would be a good thing. So I think, sure, people moving to cities is not a bad thing in and of itself, but I think what happens in Kenya is that a lot of it is, and in many places, is to one big city. And that, I think, is something we should work to counter by creating smaller centers. But that's another conversation, and I would love to have that at another time. Over to you, Eli.
Thank you so much, gentlemen and ladies, for those contributions. I mean, there's so much to be covered. Unfortunately, time is never a great friend to most of us, but we do make the most out of it. I must appreciate that we have so much that we still need to cover, and we'll throw the ball back to you, Briscoe, so that when you're coming up with your spaces, come on Wednesday, you can go into this conversation, because it's not just about the sustainability. It is equally about being able to produce and distribute this food so that our people do not starve. Yet there's a section of the the country that has more than surplus. I was hoping Prof. Serone will come back to give us his closing remarks. I don't know if he's in a position to take up the mic, Prof.
Yeah, Eli, sorry. I mean, we had to say the grace before the young guy goes to bed, so I wasn't able to answer the first one. So I think you had asked something about
I think you
why I
should
will-
move to State House. You're doing quite well, but continue.
I have been doing that for the last since 1990. How many years are those, Eli? 30 something years, right? So it's some good manners, and I think we'll continue doing it, even if we are not doing it from State House, as it were. So I think you asked a question about why is it that we are over reliant on maize, and I didn't hear what the answers were from the audience. I mean, the truth is, maize is a very recent crop in Kenya, isn't it? So it wasn't something that we had traditionally. I don't know whether this is something that came up in your conversations, because in Nandi, where I come from, we knew millet and sorghum, and maize was not there until probably it came with the colonizers that way, and that's why, for example, we call it pandiat. That's the Nandi word, the Kalenjin word for maize, and the reason why it's called bandiat is because the Mzungu who came said panda yadi mbili or panda yadi moja or something like that, and my local guys understood that to mean pandiat, panda yadi moja, pandiat, and then it became maize. That's it. So it's very new. We used to eat something else. Am I saying that the rest are good for ugali? I mean, I've eaten millet ugali, and it takes an awful lot of time for it to develop the necessary flavor that you would need to enjoy a bite of that, millet or whatever it is, ugali. So I think the delicate balance, and it comes down to those of us who understand the chemistry, the delicate balance between the two types of starch in maize and the ratio to the proteins versus what is there in the millet and the rest. But yeah, so just to say, since we learned it the other day, that doesn't mean we cannot unlearn it. We can definitely unlearn it. I know people still have a problem eating, for example, ugali from yellow maize. Out here in Europe, you in Belgium and myself, we probably cannot find white ugali, flour. So we rely a lot on yellow maize, and the ugali is not the same. It's not the same as hodari from Kenya, and that's a fact. Now, I think in sort of recapping on what we've been talking about on forests, it seems to me that there is need for government, as excited as it is, coming to power and being received with overwhelming support by everybody, including those of us who didn't necessarily vote for them. The government needs to temper its excitement with a bit of caution. Governing is not the same as campaigning for power. There are consequences that come with pronouncements, and especially when they are made by anybody the level of a deputy president or the president for that matter. And therefore, I think at some point, some things need personal restraint and a bit of informed policy positions. It's not going to work always the other way around, that you say and then you do the policy. It probably means you need to do the policy and then pronounce in that case. I brought up the question of indiscipline, and I stand by it because I know for sure that we have a problem, and it's a sort of a psychological problem, that we don't respect processes. And that is why you see corruption is very relevant and rampant in Kenya, because people want to cut corners. And the reason they want to cut corners is because they delay in following processes, and then they want to rush it. And for them to be able to reach there because they didn't prepare enough, they want to short circuit it by financing that short circuit, that sort of thing. But I mean, those of us who've gone out there, we've realized how incredibly disciplined Kenyans can be, actually to a point of being a bit docile sometimes, that they are very subservient and, very amenable to the processes. But I think back home, there is still a difference between obeying government for whatever it means and fighting your way through to ensure you get what you want. And part of the reason is because it's never clear. It's never black and white. What is it you can do, A, B, C, D, for you to get what you want? So people, in the process of guessing what they can do to get what they want, they tend to, break the law or cut the shortcuts and stuff like that. So I think for us to really have a successful Shamba system, there has to be a very clear government policy on what can and what cannot be done and by whom. Because what I foresee is the possibility that the same mighty men and women, including those who are mighty because they have a bit more money than anybody else, could end up grabbing the forest and then renting it or leasing it out to those who are weaker. And we know that is something that happened before, because where I come from, for example, there used to be people farming somewhere in the forest, and they were the mighty guys who are always getting 50 acres and then leasing it out to others, and they were making money. And this is something which will definitely come up. And this is what is wrong about it. So either the government puts a cap on, you cannot have more than 1 acre or more than 2 acres or something like that, or you cannot sublet it to somebody else, although I don't know how that would be controlled. To you need to pay something to the government for you to get to the to do forest farming if you're going to do it at more than maybe a certain number of acreages or something like that. I don't know, but there has to be a certain level of regulation on what needs to be grown there, what must be grown there, how many times it has to be done, and how long somebody can farm an area before it is fully surrendered to government for it to become fully covered by forest. In the absence of discipline and clear government policy which is enforceable, then I only see one thing. I see that we are going to go into a government supervised destruction of our forest cover. The remaining forest cover that we have will be gone. And I want to make that my closing appeal, that we see a danger in Kenya. The opposition is either being cannibalized by government, or they are getting so busy paying rent to get into government and go to bed with government. And that is really a worry for me. There is nobody to checkmate the government. The civil society is practically, for all purposes and intents, dead. And I don't know who is there as an activist to ensure that they watch over these things. It's really a quagmire at the moment. And the only advice I would give to the government, it will not be listened to, it will not be hearkened to, is get out of the forests. Don't go there. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Prof. And whatever you're saying is really something that we all need to consider as we embrace these great ideas. Geoffrey mentioned that we are very skeptical when we are doing new policies and probably a proposal from government on how to tackle our issues. And I do agree. The only problem is, from where I sit, most of these proposals come as probably an orgasm of a speech during a politician talk, and then they decide they're gonna just spew words out. We have a president that is at the UN assembly, and he's talking about climate issues that we are facing. We have a deputy that is busy asking us to go back to the forest, and then we are left wondering who is telling us what. But we are told that is how politics work, and there is a politician who is a bad cop, whereas there is a president who is making sure that he's showing leadership. That's subject to the likes of Maurice Ndole from Hot Seat News to get to tell us exactly what is the truth and the lies behind it, and how well can we keep these governments in check. I must equally note that you mentioned something, Professor, about the North Rift area. And I must equally say here that I have spent some time in the North Rift region, specifically in Eldoret when I was going there to school. And during my practice as a journalist, we were taken to Embobut area. You must be knowing that, Prof. In Elgeyo Marakwet, we went and saw these communities called the Ogiek, who were being asked to leave the forest. And there was a lot of politics around it, and politicians came in supporting or being against these ideas, saying government was being unfair to its own people. But following closely, the people that were actually fronting this idea of having people settle in the forest, it's because they were having high stakes in those forests. They had grabbed land, had allocated themselves land during probably through the reign of Moi, going upwards. And this is something that is not it's an open public secret. And therefore, as we discuss about conserving our forest cover, it is important to make sure that we do not mix between having a great policy of making sure we are able to supply food to our people, but equally knowing how it has to be executed. And I will call upon all of us to not only celebrate when we hear things that are sweet to our ears, but equally hold them accountable and be part of that movement that the Prof is asking, where is the opposition? Let's create the check and balances. Let's save and conserve our environment and our forests for the next generation. We cannot be a generation that will consume everything and expect that Mother Nature will forgive us, because Mother Nature will punish us very harshly. Maurice, I see your mic is on. You can just go ahead.
Thank you very much, Eli. And I know I'm going to make this my final submission. For those of you guys who know, it's right in the middle of business in California. So I have to also pay my bills. So one thing that I want to say, I want to borrow from Dr. Serone. I like the term you used, that we need somebody to checkmate the government. So I'm happy to provide a check for them for the 5 years that they're in office. I'm very happy to do that. And then in 2027, maybe we can checkmate them if they didn't do a good job. But anyway, so there's several things. When you're trying to communicate a message, for those of you guys who are communicators and journalists over here, there is something called noise. Noise is the kind of thing that prevents you from hearing the other person. So if you're sending somebody to be a messenger, to deliver a message, the choice of a messenger is very important. Because if you send the wrong messenger who's maybe antagonistic to the other group, they're not going to listen to the message no matter how well the message is crafted. They'll just not be able to see beyond the messenger. And that is part of the problem that I'm seeing the Ruto government, Ruto and Rigiji government starting to have, with Mr. Rigiji playing the bad cop, him being a very antagonistic player. He talks about things in a very confrontational way. And he introduces these subjects before without, they are so random. You don't see any method to the madness. So the choice of a messenger is also is always going to be an issue. And in this case, with the Rigathi Gachagua, even if the Shamba system, the planting, the cultivating in the forest was a great idea, because he's the one proposing it and the way he was saying it, he's going to face a lot of resistance. And that when you're going to see a lot of videos of Wangari Maathai trending, being used to oppose him. The issue of discipline that Dr. Serone has mentioned is also very important. Discipline is encompasses many things. We have to respect processes. And the problem is we do not respect processes in Kenya. When you go to Kenya and you're trying to do something, it doesn't even take the official at the office that you're going to get help from to ask you for a bribe. Your relatives, before you even leave, if you tell them, hey, I'm going to get an ID from the Huduma office, they're already trying to tell you who to go bribe, who to tell, and all that. So all those lack of discipline, lack of respecting the process starts from within. So we have to address those things. We have to address the indiscipline that we have, which is what is going to always bring the noise in trying to implement something new, because people are also going to see at the back of the what's happening behind the scenes, what's the intention. They're going to let people come into the forest to go in and plant, and then somebody is going to buy the forest, and then he's going to start leasing those and make some killing out of that. So lack of discipline creates bad faith. Bad faith creates inertia, and now we're not going to be able to move. And lastly, Kenya spends a lot of money on food security. I mean, I think compared to other countries, there is an organization known as New Growth International, which was founded by a gentleman who was the director of the WFP program. He's a Kenyan, but he was the director of the WFP program based in Ethiopia. One of the Nobel Prize winning, they won the Nobel Prize for food security in 2019. That group was led by a Kenyan. So they done an analysis of just how much countries are spending on food security. And impressively enough, Kenya, at least the Jubilee government and Uhuru, they spent a lot of money on food. So where is that money going? So we have to look at the efficiencies of where we are putting our monies and how those monies are being spent. And if those monies are being spent and being lost through corruption, we have to figure out a way to not just stop the corruption, but to actually hold those people who are corrupting the system accountable. The lack of accountability piece is a big problem in Kenya. People are found to have corrupted the system, and then all we do is to tell them, hey, you need to get out of here, and then we don't claw back the money. We actually let them keep the money that they've stole from us, which kind of leaves them in a stronger position. If you are to give an example with the United States, if you are found to be corrupt, they claw back the money that you stole, they put you in jail and hit you with penalties as well. And for example, it's very, very unproductive to be a drug dealer in the US, because whatever it is that once they catch you, whatever it is that you used to buy, if you don't have a receipt for it, the DEA is going to take that from you, and they will give it, they will sell it at a loss to somebody else, and you'll be spending your time in prison. So we need to kind of figure out a way to hold people accountable so that we can have build faith in our systems. Lastly, tomorrow I want to promote my Twitter Spaces as well. I do hold a Twitter Spaces every Tuesday. I know Big Scoop has his on Wednesday, and Eli has his today. So my Twitter Spaces is through Hot Seat News, my news organization. It comes out tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, which is about 8 p.m. in Kenya time. And I don't know how it translates to your local time, but please join us. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about the Middle East, the challenges and opportunities for Kenyans living in the Gulf. And we've lined up some guest speakers who are looking at some of the issues they face over there. A lot of them end up in some perilous situation. We're just dealing with one case right now in Egypt where a Kenyan was killed by one of the people who are hosting them. So we're going to be looking at those and try and look for ways to mitigate and come up with an idea of what we can do and understand the situation better. Thank you very much, Eli, for giving me this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, Maurice. Maurice, I now understand you are one of the few Kenyans who have money. You got my name right. It's Eli. Eli, for those who are still trying to get the money. I appreciate you.
I have the money in
I
your
want
I have
to-
the money in your bank account. That's the money that I have.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. So do follow Maurice Ndole at Hot Seat News and at Maurice Ndole on his personal handle. I want to take a very, I think, 3 minutes max to accommodate Beryl Makori, who is a passionate conservation ambassador. She deals with the fragile mammal that most of you might be not aware of. And probably going into the forest, I don't know if it's going to affect them or not. Beryl, kindly speak to us. 3 minutes, if you may.
Hi, everyone. I'm very lazy, like I said. I'm work with pangolins, and I'm very passionate about this topic of forest and shamba system because even at the moment we are in a workshop trying to discuss how we can save a few pangolins left in some indigenous forest. That's the only place they are found in Kenya, nowhere else. They are very, very few, and the place they are found is already divided. So this is a forest that, this quote unquote shamba system began with, and a part of it was given to people to farm alongside wildlife and forest and all that. But it didn't work because this is the breeding ground for the elephants. Elephants will come, clear out the farmlands for like maize or etc., and then kills. And then people were given the land private. And now we are looking at 2028, there won't be any forest left. That means all the pangolins and any other indigenous species like the blue duikers will be gone by 2028. That is a few years from now. We are worried because we don't know where to take these pangolins. They cannot survive anywhere else in Kenya that we know. So if this shamba system continues, I'm just wondering which type of forest they are going to do this in, because most of forests we have wildlife inside. And then wildlife are like elephants or zebras or antelopes. They'll feed on these crops or maize we are trying to grow. And then we are going to have a lot of killings from wildlife, or wildlife being killed or killing people. And then it's just going to be chaos. So unless this is planned carefully, and maybe, I don't know which type of forest they're going to do this in that is not going to affect wildlife, is going to be a big challenge for the government if they go through with this. It's also a bit risky because that means people will be in the forest. We are really trying to curb poaching. And it's going to be difficult because at the moment right now, if you're seen in the forest, you have to explain what you're doing there. But now if people are going to farm in the forest, everyone will have an excuse of being in the forest, and it's going to be difficult. For me, I'm very passionate about the pangolins, and I'll speak a lot on that. Pangolins are a small mammal that you can just pick up, put in a gunia or a bag and leave. And now what is helping is people are not allowed to just move in the forest anyhow. The rangers have to find out what you're doing. But then if people are farming in the forest, whatever time you are found, you're like, I'm coming from my shamba. It's late, but I had something to do, so I'm coming late. So they'll just go with whatever they want, whatever wildlife species they want to go with. So as much as we are thinking this is a good thing for food provision in the country, it's going to eradicate, this food shortage and everything, you also have to think about every other thing and be holistic about this whole shamba system thing. Wildlife is also as important as everything else. It's a big honor for the country, and we're going to run into problems, especially now because I think in the past we had more forests, but now is a lot of it is lost, and the little that we have, even the animals are not, they don't have enough space in this little left forest. So if we cut more, because we have to cut for us to farm, is going to be a mess. Some of the indigenous forests, like the Nyekweri forest, you cut one tree that has been there 100 years, and then you tell me this farmer is going to plant it, even his grandchildren will grow up before this tree grows back to whatever it was before. So yeah, it may have its pros and cons, but it will take a lot of convincing for other stakeholders to buy this idea. Anyway, I joined in late. Sorry for that. I may not have a lot to add on this because time has already gone. But thank you so much, Eli, for this chance.
Thank you so much, and that is Beryl Makori. You may just want to reach out to Beryl because of the kind of amazing job she's doing with those special mammals called pangolins. You guys can Google that out, and you'll be impressed by what pangolins are. They are mammals, very beautiful ones. We've done quite a story with Beryl in the past. You can find it out on our channel, The Arts in Heart, and therefore I invite you guys to get there and subscribe to our channel. We do so much more than Twitter Spaces. For the moment, we're taking a break to just rearrange ourselves, but we are streaming this equally on our YouTube channel because I notice it is very difficult retrieving spaces after they are done. I think Twitter will have to do a better job in trying to arrange normal tweets and spaces so that when you want to go and listen to whatever was discussed, it's easy to locate them. But to make it easier for you guys, we stream them on our channel as we speak, so it's always available for your review and probably reference in the future. Having said that, allow me to quickly note that it is important we discuss these matters and give proposals as solutions. So I do hope that as Beryl, as a professor, and the rest of the speakers have spoken very passionately about why it might be a bad idea. This is only bad politics, but politics in the negative aspect of what we should be doing. And therefore, look at the lakes of Kakamega Forest. If you have been to Kakamega Forest or heard about Kakamega Forest, it is one of the only natural tropical forests found in this part of Kenya. Followed by that, beginning with that one of Congo. And therefore, it really leaves a lot of question marks as to the approach you are giving. Mao has just informed me in the chat that actually the like of Mao Forest has been adopted by the Commonwealth, and therefore we do not have control on it. And it's something that many might argue it's good for our nation, but many will equally argue then where does our sovereignty stand in that, and how can we ensure that our natural resources, yes, as much as they protect the well-being of the entire planet, they actually remain part and parcel of us. Eco Mazingira, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned about 2 forests in Kisii and Kilgoris that have naturally died out because of the Shamba system. So we are seeing a situation of where things are much more disadvantageous than advantageous to us as we approach this, especially since we are bad at respecting policy. Even though we'll talk policy, we'll talk about regulations, we have seen a trend whereby as citizens, as a people, we are not so keen in respecting that. So it leaves us questions more than answers and creates room for debate moving forward. Let us hold ourselves accountable, even as we speak the truth to those ones in power. Having said that, I want to take this opportunity to welcome Brief Scoop to give us a quick one on what he'll be handling, if possible, this Wednesday, I believe so, on his space, which is more in agriculture and sustainability. Brief Scoop.
Thank you, Eli. As always, amazing space. And it actually completely bleeds into my space this coming Wednesday. This week at 8:30 East African time, we are looking at a very related subject, which is cash crops. Have cash crops infringed on the ability of Kenya to be food secure? Are cash crops infringing on food security in Kenya? Are Kenyans basically too focused on cash crops because we keep being told that we have to sell, cash crops to obtain dollars in order to be able to buy the things that we need that we do not produce, in favor of, to the detriment of our own food security, which of course result in us needing to import food. So that's what we'll be looking at with all the different angles. There's a video that was shared earlier this week, and I think I've shared it under my, by the way, I've shared the link to my space in the Jumbotron. You can see it up there. And I think I've shared the video of these guys talking about why the petrodollar is the reason why the West deliberately ensures that the global South does not have food security, so that they can continue to sell us food, dump food on our continent, while demanding, while forcing us to take out debt loans to finance consumption, which is, of course, is a losing streak, and they go on to explain why our debts can never be repaid. So looking forward to that conversation. And those are the types of conversations we have every week. Agricultural economics and food security, the economics and the politics of food security, and by extension, the economy. So look forward to seeing all of you there as well. And until then, hasta luego. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Biscup. Pay
Eli,
attention to that. Professor, your moment.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to butt in because I have just received some devastating news that Paul Gicheru, who was a lawyer that was involved in some witness interference at judges at the ICC, was found dead at his home in Karen a short while ago. And it's a bit personal for me. Paul was my junior at Kapsabet Boys when I was leaving. He was joining, so we met, I think, for 1 year at Kapsabet High School. This is the most devastating piece of news that is just breaking. That Kenyan lawyer Paul Gicheru is found dead at his current home, confirmed by the police, posted by a number of media houses, including the Standard. Absolutely devastating.
My condolences to you on behalf of Art in Heart, and of course to the family and friends of lawyer Paul Gicheru. Our hearts and prayers go to them. And on the same breath, I equally want to say that we condole with the families of the people of Kiambu for the buildings that were reported to have collapsed, and several lives feared to be lost, including missing persons. It is a tough moment for our country. I know for a fact, for those who have been following the news, the president was very adamant on need for us to pray. And what a way to come to that need. I will request Pastor Esmond to pray for us as we close down. And of course, special prayers to you, Professor, and again, the family of lawyer Paul Gicheru. Professor, Pastor Esmond, please.
Wow. My condolences. That's a very sad story. Very shocking news. Continue praying that God's peace will prevail. Guard your hearts and your minds, Paul, Professor, and to everybody in the entire country for such a loss. And for everybody that has participated, may God bless you. Let's continue these conversations as we add our voice to the governance of our country. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for always bringing us together, though with divergent views, but still united in you, knowing that we are brothers and sisters. Currently, people are calling in from different parts of this world, but yet we have never forgotten that our voices, once united, they can make a difference. Continue using this space as we add our voice to the governance of our country. We pray for the nation of Kenya and all the other nations represented in this space tonight. I pray that God, you continue to uphold our nation. I pray that you give good guidance to our new leaders. Your word commands us to pray for those in authority. God, we pray that even as they continue to lead us, they should not forget the weak in our societies, to feed those that are hungry and to provide shelter to those that don't have. With the news that we have received concerning Paul Gisheru, we pray that your comfort will go to his family and his friends, the entire nation. Even as we end now, continue binding us with cords of love until we reconnect again. We surrender to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Esmond, and everyone that came to the show on behalf of the Arts in Heart family and production team. I do want to say a big thank you. We hope to catch up with you again on Thursday as we host a space on the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. We want to look at the facts of the issues on the ground, get to understand